Hello, everyone. Welcome to this dialogue between British scholars and Professor Li Hongtu from University of Fudan. I'm Dr. Junqing Wu, work from University of Liverpool. I'm an expert on Imperial Chinese religious history, so I'm slightly remote from this field, but it has been really interesting to follow on this. So let me just introduce Professor Li Hongtu. He works in University of Fudan and East China Normal. His field is in European intellectual thought. Recently, he has published a book on Stuart Mill. So Professor Li, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm Li Hongtu. I work in the Fudan History Department of Fudan University. In my research field is modern European intellectual history, especially 19th centuries. I like many great thinkers such as Tocqueville, John Mill, and other thinkers. Last 10 years or more than 10 years, I research and John Mill on liberty.
My name is Dr. Ross Carroll. I am a senior lecturer in political theory here at the University of Exeter, where I work on history of political thought, and particularly the political thought of England and France in the 18th and 19th centuries. Thank you.
I'm Dario Castiglione. I teach political theory at the University of Exeter, and I'm the director of the Center for Political Thought. And we welcome very much Professor Li for this interview. And so we can now start perhaps the interview itself. And my colleague Ross Carroll will ask the first question.
Thank you so much, Professor Li, for participating in this event and also for writing such a stimulating book. I thought it was very interesting. So in the introduction to the book, you mentioned that you will explore Mill's intellectual trajectory, his journey, if you like, intellectually. And I wondered if you could do something for us and explain your own intellectual journey, your own intellectual trajectory. How did you come to work on John Stuart Mill? And specifically, how did you come then to study Mill using the methods of Cambridge School contextualism?
Yeah, thank you very much. My study on Mill's liberal thought has undergone two periods. The first lasted from 1993 to 2015. After having finished my books on European nationalism, I turned to study of European liberalism. I began to read some works such as Tocqueville and Mill. During the meantime, I was also lecturer undergraduate in the course of On Classic of European Thought and guiding the student in the intensive reading of the Mill's on liberty. In 2007, I published a book, From Power to Rise, a study on modern European liberalism. 2 years later, I published another book, an intensive reading of the Mill's on liberty. After publication, however, I felt much was left untouched for future research. Since 2015, my research has entered a new stage. In that year, I won a financial grant from Fudan Guanghua Fund, which was a scholar trip to Cambridge for 3 months. My plan was to take this chance for reading some books. On my reading list were William McCall, Elements of Individualism, and Josiah Warren's work on individual solvent. Mill mentioned this book. After my reading this work, I raised more questions to be answered. One question is, why did Mill write on liberty? I tried to provide a possible explanation. I think that I should adopt a method of comparative school to study. During this period, I had published some articles, and now the research is still on. My goal to publish a book on the text of Mill's on liberty. This is my answer.
Thank you very much. My second question leads on very much from what you just said. So you mentioned that you were trying to work out why Mill wrote on liberty in the first place. And I was very intrigued by one of the arguments you made in the book and concerning that question. And you kind of brought in Mill's personal background, and particularly his relationship to Harriet Taylor. And you seem to suggest that the social stigma that they suffered as a result of their relationship might have motivated Mill to work on the book. And you also, of course, mentioned the role played by Harriet Taylor Mill in Mill's thinking and in the composition of the work. Could you say a little bit about this argument about social stigma and tell us what you think Harriet Taylor Mill's role was in the composition of the work?
Yeah, this is a good question. And I think, how to say, I think, the admirable literature on Mill's on liberty deal mostly with analysis of its contents, which I think is a great value in understanding the theme of the book. After extensive reading of the related materials, however, I realized that text can also be seen as his own self-defense. I think and Mill writer and on liberty is the defender and his own life, especially with his wife, Harriet Taylor. So, consider his life experience. I discovered that his arguments are based on Mill's relation with Harriet. For instance, Mill mentioned the concepts such as private life, social stigma, enemy of society, and moral police, and point out that one who lives a life in his or in her own way in defense of social norms will be treated like an enemy of society, and his life will be made uncomfortable by society, so as to bring him to or he into line. In my textual analysis, beneath as the visible text on liberty is hidden Mill's own life experience, which promote him to reflection on the tension between individual liberty and the social authority, and to criticize the collective social norms of Victoria era. It is from this consideration that I decided to understand the theme that one found in one on liberty is reflecting Mill's own and Harriet's life experience. This leads naturally to claim that the work was written jointly by Mill and Harriet. Mill himself made a reference to this in his autobiography, and this is made even more explicit in Fly Leaf on Liberty, where Mill says he and Harriet wrote a book together.
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating hypothesis. And indeed, it makes me think that future editions of On Liberty should list the work as co-authored rather than just the work of John Stuart.
Yeah, so I think it's and two and together wrote this book. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not only and it's Mill and alone and write this book. Yeah,
absolutely. So thinking also about some of Mill's other influences, you mentioned in your answer to my first question that you read Tocqueville around the same time that you encountered Mill. And of course, there was an intellectual friendship between Tocqueville and Mill. how important do you think Mill's intellectual relationship with Tocqueville was to his political thought?
The question concerned intellectual resource valuable to Mill when he wrote on liberty. I hold that Tocqueville played an important role in the formation of the Mill's thought, but we should not overstate that role. It should be noticed that Mill absorbed in many thoughts from various sources, and even if Tocqueville hadn't appeared in his intellectual life, he would still have written on liberty. For example, Alexander von Humboldt and Germany and thinker. And Humboldt's thought also influenced Mill, which could be seen in his quotation of Humboldt on the fly leaf on liberty. By the way, I like Tocqueville and Tocqueville. I think I admire Tocqueville's thought. I think he's a great thinker in the 19th century.
Thank you so much. So thinking about the text of On Liberty, one of the things that is interesting in your book is that you don't just present On Liberty as a reflection on individual autonomy or individual freedom. You also mention how the book touches on the themes of barbarism, civilization, progress, stagnation, and so on. And I was very struck in this part of your book by Mill's comments on China, which I hadn't really thought about much before. And you mentioned that for Mill, China was kind of stuck in a state of stagnation. And I was wondering whether this view that Mill had, doubtless a flawed view, this view of China, was this typical of Victorians in England at the time, or did Mill have a particular understanding of China's progress and development?
This question is very thought-provoking. I think as a scholar in China, so I wanted to deal with a topic about Mill's how to Mill's on China in his On Liberty, in his text on liberty. So I think was Mill comment on China his own original understanding or merely an expression of the common object of that age? I think it belong to the latter. It is a collective utterance by many thinkers of that time, a common discourse, that China was viewed as barbarous and stagnant. The discourse put China within the dualist framework of the civilization, barbarism, and progress stagnation. My research attempts to analyze Mill's utterance on that and conclude that Mill divided discourse into two, putting India within the dualist of civilization and barbarism, while putting China in progress stagnation. So Mill made a distinction between the two. So this is Mill understand China. This is Mill opinion about on China.
Okay, thank you, Professor Li. And I would like to now move to a slightly different topic in the interview, and but it's connected to your answer on China in a way. Professor Li, you are the Deputy Director of the Center for Global Intellectual Research, which is based in Shanghai. And recently you have written 2 articles, one in English on the genealogy of human rights in a global perspective, and one published in French on the translation of Mill's idea of well-being. Now, in different ways, these 2 essays are interesting examples of a kind of global intellectual history. So My question is really, can you tell us why you think this line of research is important and distinctive?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have established jointly with the East China Normal University, and this is another university, top university in Shanghai. We joined and established jointly with the university and founded the Center for Global Intellectual History Studies in the hope of convening academic resource to build up this emerging research field. We have published several research papers within the past 2 years, and the two you have mentioned are among them. These 2 articles were written within the China actual context and within China present concern in mind, with reference to China integration into the global system. An urgent issue to settle is about human rights. It is on this issue that China and the West are engaged in the debate, each holding a different review. I regard it as an academic issue which requires us to go back to its historical root and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in particular to see how it was drawn up as a set of international common standards. It is of great value for us to explore the debate in 1948 on the issue of human rights to see how different countries, including China, understand the issue. The article on happiness is also based on China reality and closely related to my study on Mill's thoughts on well-being or happiness. How do people achieve well-being or happiness? Is it something granted by others or the result of own pursuit? Does it involve a social system as well as individual independence and freedom? This is the question to which Mill devoted his thought. So this question may not longer seem that important in the Western world. It is relevant to our choice of future path in China. So I agree with you that research on global thought is of important and perhaps very unique. It is even very urgent now in China.
I think we all hope that the exchange with Chinese university could go back to normal as soon as possible. And it's just, yeah, thanks for the very interesting dialogue. I've got a question as well for Professor Li, and that's from, I'm afraid, from kind of general public point of view, because I'm not an expert on European thoughts. So I would like to ask Professor Li is that historically we saw there are 2 models of attending human rights and political liberalism. One is the British model, which is through, achieve this gradual by gradual, just a little bit every time, but it sort of lasted for quite a long period of time. And the other is the French model. You had a revolution, of course, at great cost, but then things get done quickly. I'd just like to know what Professor Li's thought on that, and do you think which model is better?
Yeah, thank you. This is a good question. And I think in general, I agree with your statement that Britain and France have offered 2 distinct models when enter the modern era. But one point that needed to be made is that we shouldn't have got the British Revolution in the 17th century. To some extent, the British also obtained their political right through revolution. So in consequence, a more exact conclusion should be that British model is a combination of revolution and conservative while French is more radical indeed. So I think so we understood and is put in the history and the context to understand this different and models.
Thank you, Professor Li.